Okay. All right then. Welcome everyone to this class. Um, Today we're going to be speaking about understanding the task, that is improving your score, checking and correcting for IELTS and language search. Okay, so let's begin with the heart of both IELTS and language search. Because I mean, what we want to achieve here is how to write it successfully, how to understand the task, and different things like that. And then many candidates believe that grammar is the biggest obstacle, but actually, misunderstanding the question is the real score destroyer. In IELTS, misunderstanding can drag a band seven scripts down to a band five. And then in language, just missing one bullet point can drop the entire grade level. So when the task lands in front of you, you need to pause. Do not rush. Study the instruction. The command verb is your compass, so to speak. So if it says discuss, it expects exploration. If it says argue, it expects, a clear position. And if it says write a report or review in the case of language, it expects a specific format, tone, or perhaps even purpose. So you need to think of it as a contract between you and the examiner. If you fulfill it, you're rewarded. And if you ignore parts of it, then your score suffers. Okay, so this is why planning is so valuable. Um, a quick 30-second plan can be the difference between a structured, coherent response and a confused journey, so to speak. I mean, when you write with confusion on your paper, then it's I don't know, the moot point, so to speak. Anyway, you need to think of it as a contract between you and the examiner. Okay, so let's talk about improving your score, right? Now, examiners in both IELTS and language search, they appreciate writing that feels intentional. Okay, they appreciate writing that feels intentional. They're trained to look for clarity, for structure, right? For logical development and um, grammatical control. All right. So they're not impressed by long dramatic sentences or things like that. They want writing that gets to the point and that stays anchored to the task. So we need to address the habits that lower lower the scores, right? When you overcomplicate your sentences, like you're repeating the same simple vocabulary, or you're jumping from one idea to another without guiding the reader. And we've talked about that in the past, when we're talking about paragraphs, right? Those kinds of things make your score lower when it comes to IELTS or language set, or basically most English tests, as it were. So you need to also make sure that you are not writing generic statements that are unrelated to the question. And perhaps the most dangerous thing is failing to cover the bullet points in the tasks that have been given to you. Okay, so this basically are the things that will do to lower your score when you're taking either IELTS or language search English test. And this brings us to to checking and correcting as well. So in both your exams, your final check is like polishing, like polishing diamond, like polishing a gemstone. Okay. Now those the last minutes, they can remove the grammar slips, the repeated words, the missing articles, or you know those informal phrases that you would put there in an otherwise formal task. So you're not rewriting, but basically what you're doing at the end of the day is that you're refining. Okay, you polish your script so that you can get a higher score. Okay, so basically this is what we'll be covering today. We're also going to go through um so okay, as we go through this topic, right, I want you to see these exams not as intimidating tests, but as predictable systems. Okay, so each has rules, each rewards clarity, each rewards discipline. So once you understand the expectations, the writing becomes, a controlled, confident performance, as it were. So by the end of this training, you'll be able to, read your tasks with a sharp eye. You'll be able to plan with purpose, and also you'll be able to write with clarity and edit whatever it is that you've written with confidence. And this is really, at the end of the day, this is the pathway to getting your higher bands or your higher grades in both IELTS and language cert. Okay, now what do examiners want? What do examiners want? Right? Now I want you to imagine um, this, right? So we all know that examiners are humans, right? And they read hundreds, perhaps even thousands of scripts every week. So they're tired, they're busy, and the important part is that they're allergic to confusion. So if your writing is messy, if it's unclear, or if it jumps around like a roller coaster, they feel it. And then your marks get get they take a hit. Okay, so what do they actually want? Let's break it down. For IELTS examiners, the examiners focus on four main areas, right? They focus on your task response. That is, did you actually answer the question? Number two, they focus on coherence and cohesion, right? Does your writing flow logically from one idea to the next? Okay, and then it's important to them to that you have lexical response, right? Sorry, lexical resource. Now, what they want to know there is that did you use the did your vocabulary, did it fit the task, right? And does it help to express your meaning clearly? Okay. And then number four, your grammatical range and accuracy. That's also very important to them. So are your sentences correct? Are they readable? Are they varied? Okay. And then for language search, they focus on tone, okay, because they're slightly different because of the way their testing is. So they test practical workplace ready writing, so to speak. So they want to they test for your tone. Is it appropriate for the context, right? Your purpose, did you fulfill the aim of the task, right? And then bullet points slash the task requirements. Did you cover everything that you were asked? And then of course clarity and accuracy is also very important. So they want to know, can the reader understand your message clearly? Now, there's a golden rule, okay? None of them wants drama. None of them want drama. They don't want paragraphs that sound like you're auditioning to impress the queen. They want purpose, right? They want sense. They want writing that says, I know exactly what I am doing and I'm giving you what you asked for. Okay? So basically, that is what examiners want. So if you remember nothing at all from what I've just said, right, you need to um, just put in your, and remember that, okay, keep it in your mind that what's the single most important thing that examiners want. And basically, what they want is they want intentionality, they want clarity, they want structure, right? They want to know that you understand the task. Okay? And then secondly, we want to go to why understanding the task matters. Why understanding the task matters. Now, we're getting to a spot where many learners they trip without even realizing it, right? And here's the tricky truth. It's not always English that's the problem. It's understanding the question, misreading the task, that kind of thing. And that is a score killer. You understand? It's a score killer. Now, let's take um a question, for instance. The instruction says, and this is usually from IELTS task 2. So it says, do you agree or disagree? What do some students do? They then write both sides. It's a good effort, but what you really want to do is to pick one side, right? Do you agree? You pick whether you agree, or do you disagree? You pick whether you disagree. Do not argue both sides, because if you do that, then your band will drop. Or whether in language search, you get a question that might say, apologize, explain the problem, and ask for a solution. At this juncture, some students will write only two of those three parts. Maybe they apologize and they explain, or they forget about the solution, that kind of a thing. And then, of course, what happens? The results drop. So here's the key. It does not matter how brilliant your English is. You could write beautifully with perfect grammar, impressive vocabulary, and even a poetic flow. But if you answer the wrong question, the examiner's hands are tied. Okay? So they cannot reward a beautiful answer that misses the task entirely. So for example, right? Some people think then I'm trying to think of a nice example to give. Um, what's this question asking me to do is something that I really need to think about. And so I want to, and then you also need to think about what must I include, right? And so I want to give you an example of a question that we can then analyze, so to speak. So an example of that kind of question would be, some people think that technology is making our lives easier. Others think it's creating more problems. So you need to discuss both views and give your opinion. Now, what is the real demand here, right? What is the real demand? They're asking that you discuss both views and give your opinion. At this point, you're not just picking one, you have to actually argue on both. Do you understand what I'm saying? So you need to be sure that you're asking a question, you're answering the question that is being asked. You're reading and you're analyzing the question adequately, and then you're answering the question the way it is required that you do so. So whenever you sit for an exam, You need to stop before you write. You need to read carefully. You need to pause. You need to ask yourself exactly what is the question demanding. Okay? And then you need to understand the task fully, because that is your first and your most important step towards a high score. And once that light bulb clicks, everything else, the planning, the writing, the checking, becomes easier. Okay? Then next, you need to be able to identify task type. Identify task type. Now you need to think of this as your secret map. Okay? So what is the command verb? What is the command verb? Because the command verb is what will help you shape the tone, the structure, and even the paragraph plan. So if you know the verb, the whole task suddenly becomes much clearer. Okay, so what you want to do is you want to discuss, you want to explore both sides, you want to know whether you should pick just one side. You need to you just basically need to show that you understand the multiple perspectives. Okay, so that's what it's talking about when they say discuss. And then if they're saying argue, that means you need to take a strong position and defend it. You're not a neutral participant here. Okay, you're picking a side, basically. You understand? You're not Switzerland. And then if they say explain, then you need to make sure that you're giving reasons, you're showing cause, and you're showing the effect. You need to make it logical and clear, okay? And then describe talks about you painting a picture with details, okay? So you need to use examples, you need to use sensory details if that is appropriate, okay? And then finally, if they're asking you, oh, compare, that means you want to show the difference or the similarities clearly. You don't just list them, but you make sure that they connect some way or the other. And as for language search, it's not just about the verb, it's the whole style, okay? And emails, reports, reviews, they each have their own vibe, their own tone, um, basically bullet pointed. So a review can be slightly more expressive but still purposeful, okay? And an email often has clear sections like greeting, purpose, details, closing, that kind of a thing. Now, here's an analogy that I like to use, okay? Now, you need recognizing the verb is like knowing whether you're cooking stew or baking a cake, right? Now, the ingredients, the method, the timing, it all changes depending on the task. So you miss the type of the dish and your essay or your email won't come out right. All right. So remember that every task has has a hidden instruction, and that is the verb. Let me reiterate that. Okay. Let me reiterate that when it says discuss, you explore both sides. You don't just pick one side, you show understanding of the multiple perspectives. Okay? When it says argue, then you take a strong position and you go ahead and you defend it. Okay? You remember I said you're not Switzerland, you cannot be neutral. Okay? Then when it says explain, it means that you have to give reasons. Okay? You have to show cause and effect, and you have to make it logical and clear. And then if it says describe, you have to give reasons. You have to show, sorry, I mean, you have to paint a picture. You have to give details, okay? You have to use examples. You have to use sensory details where that is necessary, okay? And then when it says compare, you need to show the difference between the similarities, um, of the points there, and it has to be very clear. You have to show it with clarity, okay? You don't just list them down, you make sure that they connect. So basically, that's it. So every time you have, those verbs, those actions, you have to be sure, what it is that it is saying, and then you have to follow through with that. So treat it as your roadmap. If you follow it carefully, then the rest of your writing, your planning, and your paragraphing, basically, even your vocabulary and your grammar will fall into place. But if you ignore it, then even the most perfect English will still earn you low marks. So that's something very important that you need to keep in mind. Okay. Um, Next, we want to talk about breaking down the requirements. Okay, breaking down the requirements. Now, examiners actually wish that every student would do this step. You need to break down the task carefully, but too many people actually skip it, and that's where the marks slip away. Actually, now here's how to do it step by step. Excuse me. You need to first underline the key words, you underline the topic, okay? And these are the words that the examiner is testing, so you make sure you do not miss them, okay? Secondly, you need to identify the angle, that is, you spot the topic, okay? You spot the topic. You basically ask yourself, what is the general subject, okay? Are we talking about education? Are we talking about technology? Are we talking about environment, okay? And then thirdly, you spot the required elements, okay? You spot the required elements. That's the focus. You spot the focus. So what specifically about the topic are they asking you to address? Okay. Also, you need to spot the limits. That is, define your boundaries. Okay. Sometimes the task gives boundaries like time period, population, location, or scope. You make sure that you don't wander outside of you know that boundary, as it were. And then you need to ask yourself, what must I definitely include here, and what must I avoid? Because that will then determine how IELTS or language set will assess your response, as it were. Okay. Now, a key exam trick for IELTS is that IELTS often sneaks in two-part questions. You answer the first part and forget the second, you lose marks. Okay, so that's something that you need to keep in mind whenever you're doing IELTS or IELTS, as it were. And then when it's for language search, right? Um, Sometimes the tone is hidden, or the purpose in the instruction is hidden. So if you miss it, your email, your report, your review basically will feel off. So you need to be sure that what it is that you need to be sure of the tone. Do you understand? I mean, you need to be able to read between the lines, so to speak. Okay. So yeah, the habit here basically is to build. Okay, you need to make sure that you don't start writing until you've dissected the task, and then you build up from there. Okay, so you need to underline, you need to highlight, you need to ask yourself, what must I do, what must I not do? Okay, this step alone can save your whole band, as it were. Okay. um uh, okay, and then, yes, let's talk about the common task errors. The common task errors. Now, um, people commit of some crimes, you know, during exams. And don't worry, I've been there to solution. Now, these crimes are errors. I'm not talking about exam or practice or anything like that. Now I'm talking about errors, like um, um, there's some really predictable and um avoidable errors, and you need to know them. Okay. Now, first and foremost, writing what you know and not writing what was asked is a classic mistake. You know a lot about your favorite topic, maybe climate change or your hometown, but the task is asking you about technology in school. Now, it doesn't matter how brilliant your paragraph is, if it is off topic, you lose marks. So you need to make sure that you're not going off topic because an idea just popped into your head. Sometimes, a brilliant thought even arrives mid-writing and we kind of start to chase it around like a puppy. It might be fun for you, but it's deadly for your marks. So yeah, you need to make sure that you're using memorized templates. So you're not using memorized templates that do not um, fit the question. Okay. In there's a there's this infamous band 9 templates. It's great in theory, but it's terrible if it doesn't actually answer the task. And examiners can smell a forced fit from a mile away. Okay, so yeah, it's important. Then with language search, make sure that you do not ignore the bullet points. Okay, one missing bullet point and boom, the whole grade can collapse. Okay, so students often forget the tone. Sometimes they omit a solution or they skip a reason, and that's very catastrophic if you do that, because at the end of the day you lose big marks. Okay, so the moral here is write for the task, not for yourself. Okay, you need to keep your eyes on the question like a hawk, and if you do, you'll avoid these common laughable and perhaps even costly mistakes. Okay, now let's talk about improving your score. Improving your score. Now, improving your score is not about magic vocabulary, okay? It's not about showing off every fancy word you've ever learned or so or anything like that. The real secret is basically order, it's clarity, and it is purpose, okay? And here's how you do it. You need to make sure that you make a tiny plan, like even 30 seconds to jot down your main points will keep you grounded. So think of it like building the frame before adding the walls, okay? Like without a plan, your essay or your email can collapse like a house of cards, okay? So that's something that you want to be sure that you're not doing. Then you need to make sure that you write this purpose. Every paragraph, every sentence, every word should have a job. Ask yourself, does this serve the task? Does this serve the task? If if you're able to answer that question, then you know that you're on the right path. Okay? And then you need to give each paragraph one job, one idea. We talked about paragraphs in our last class. So, this is where you're able to put it to use. Okay. So you need to give it each paragraph one job, one idea, fully explained, supported with examples and things like that. And then, you know, use them like your employees. Give them clear roles. Don't just let them wander. Okay. And then develop your ideas. Develop your ideas. Don't leave your points shallow. Give reasons, give examples, give explanations, give depth. Because when you have that, then you have a higher band. Okay. And then use examples naturally, not forcefully. Okay. Irrelevant or overly complex examples, they don't impress. Make them fit the argument and make them relevant. Okay. And then keep your sentences clean. Avoid unnecessary twists, loops, tautologies, overly long constructions. Just keep it simple, clear, let your writing be calm and confident. Okay. If your writing feels calm and organized, the examiner relaxes, and when the examiner relaxes, they can read comfortably, and comfortable reading will lead to higher marks. Okay. So remember that improving your score isn't magic, it's a method. You know, you have to be calm, you have to be organized, you have to write purposefully, and make sure that you're being clean and clear about what you're doing. Purposeful writing beats fancy words every time. So once you master planning, paragraphing, and developing ideas, the rest, like vocabulary and grammar, will follow naturally. Okay. And then we want to talk about um, what boosts band scores. What boosts band scores? All right. Um, there are four key areas. Now, these are what the examiners are trained to spot immediately. Did you answer the first one? Did you answer the question directly? Okay. Did you answer the question directly? Because task response is everything. Examiners do not reward essays that wonder. I said that before. Answer the question, cover every part, and stay on target. Secondly, did your writing flow logically? Did your writing flow logically? Because coherence and cohesion are your friends. All right. I'll say that again. Coherence and cohesion are your friends. Paragraphs should follow each other like steps in a dance. Ideas should link clearly, not jump around like a skipping record. Okay? Okay? Um, then you need to ask yourself now, did your vocabulary fit the ideas? Did your vocabulary fit the ideas? And when I say vocabulary, I don't mean throwing in giant words to impress. I mean precision. Okay? Using the right word for the right meaning. Clear, natural, accurate. That's what examiners reward. Okay? Examiners are trained to reward clarity, cohesion, precision, and consistency, not fancy words, not dramatic phrases, not flowery ideas. They're thinking, does the writer answer the question effectively? So remember the four boosters, right? Answer the task, organize logically, use the right words, keep grammar steady, focus, here, and your score will climb faster than you just trying to memorize 100 fancy words that you'll never be able to use correctly. Okay? Precision, clarity, and consistency. Those are your secret weapons. All right? Now, We've talked about what can boost your scores. Let's talk about what lowers your band scores. Okay. Now, we're entering danger territory. The things that quietly, sneakily destroy scores. I call them the score killers. And yes, they're very predictable, which is good news because once you know them, then you're able to avoid them. And the first one, usually, that I've noticed is repetition. Saying the same word or idea over and over again. Okay. Examiners notice this and it feels lazy. That it comes across as lazy. So even if your grammar is perfect, repeating yourself signals that you can't express yourself precisely. Then secondly, ideas jumping around. Now, one paragraph starts with technology, then the next jumps to education, and then back to climate change. It's confusing, and confusing flow equals to lost marks. And then irrelevant points. Irrelevant points. Um, cute, interesting, or clever ideas that don't answer the question. They still the space and then they harm your task response. Okay, so you don't want to do that. And then sentences that swallowed too many commas. Okay, like long tangled sentences meant to impress actually, but end up confusing the examiner. So, you know, try not to write complex sentences because clarity beats complexity. Okay. And then using informal language in a formal email, for instance. So tone matters. Don't slip in "Hey boss" or "No worries" when the task expects professionalism. Okay. Um, then also templates that sound robotic, memorized um, phrases. I mean, these can help, but they don't fit the context. They don't fit the context. So basically, just give me 1 minute, please. Sorry about that. Okay, so where was I? Basically, okay, I was saying that memorized phrases can help, but if they don't fit the context, naturally they stand out, and they stand out not in a good way. So yeah, you need to ensure that you don't do that as well. So you need to watch out for repetition because at the end of the day, if you continue to repeat yourself time and time again about the same thing, then you start to sound like a broken record. So you need to avoid or watch out for repetition. You need to watch out for chaotic ideas. You need to watch out for irrelevant context, And then you need to watch out for also tangled. You need to watch out for tangled sentences, informal tone. Um, just avoid this basically, because when you do, then your writing suddenly becomes the examiner's dream. It becomes examiner friendly, and this is where the marks quietly rise, and then you are able to avoid all the unnecessary mistakes, as it were. Okay, now the next thing we're going to talk about is checking and correcting. Checking and correcting. Um, we've built our essay, right? We've structured our paragraphs, we've chosen our words carefully. Now we arrive at the final sacred step. And you need to think of this like shining your gemstone. You've already cut it, you've shaped it, you've set it in the ring. But those last few minutes, they're what will make it sparkle, okay? And in both IELTS and language search, those last 2 minutes of the exam, they are gold. They can save marks that you didn't even know you were, losing. So you need to have a checklist of what to look for. You need to make sure that you're checking your verbs, okay? Are your tenses consistent? Your subject verb agreement, are they intact? Did you accidentally write he go instead of he goes? Those are things that you need to check for. Then you need to check your articles, a, and, the, those tiny words, they create a huge impact, okay? So it's important to know that, you're not missing any of those words, or you've not misused any of those articles. And yeah, basically, so that you don't get your marks to drop also. And then you need to check your spelling. You need to check your spelling. Simple mistakes are avoidable, but they can still hurt your band or your grade if you do not check for them. Okay, then check for repeated words. It's okay to repeat a word once or twice, or maybe even thrice. But when it starts to get too much, then it becomes a challenge. So you need to vary your vocabulary naturally. Okay, so because repetition is boring and it lowers your lexical score. Then you need to check if the tone matches the task. Remember, in language that if you're told to write an email or report or something like that, you must sound professional. And then in IELTS, formal essays need formal register. So one hey or can signal casual writing, and then it lowers your marks. Okay, and then you need to check if you actually covered all of the points, especially for maybe two parts questions or multi-bullet language set tasks. So did you answer everything that is required? You need to make sure that you know you check for all of that. So you need to understand that editing is not rewriting. You're not starting over. You're just polishing what you've already built. And every minute spent refining is like adding a little shine that the examiners will notice. Okay. So remember that you should not skip those last few minutes. You need to use it to check, to correct, to refine, because these small actions can lift your score more than you imagine. You need to think of it as editing your secret weapon for calm, confident, and examiner friendly writing. Okay, and then um, we need to go on, so we're now on the home stretch, which is where we put everything that we've practiced into a simple and reliable system. So you need to think of this as your survival checklist. something that you can use under pressure in the exam room. So these are the questions that you're asking yourself. Question 1, did I answer every part of the question? Okay, so you need to check for the missing pieces. IELTS often sneaks in two-part questions, and language search likes, like I said before, the multi-bullet instruction. So if you skip one, your marks, they vanish silently. Then the second question is, are my paragraphs clear and focused? Okay, are they clear and focused? So you're asking yourself, did I support my ideas clearly? Okay, are your points fully explained with examples or reasoning, or did I use shallow ideas? Because when you have shallow ideas, then you lose marks. Okay, and then does the tone match the task type? Okay, that is the tone, is it correct for for this task? Okay, so if it's a formal essay, keep it formal. If it's a professional email or report, keep it polite, keep it concise, keep it structured, because tone matters more than you realize. Okay, and then you want to ask, is the grammar consistent? So are my grammar choices consistent? Okay, your tenses, your subject verb agreement, your articles, your plurals, those kinds of things. Because tiny errors, they add up, right? And then consistency is equal to calm and professional writing. Okay, then can I make any sentence clearer? You need to check. Okay, can any sentence be clearer? Can it be shorter? Can it be more precise? Okay, so just to check whether or not you can, there are any loose screws that need to be tightened. Okay, could a vague word be replaced with a more precise one, or could any awkward phrasing be smoothed over, that kind of a thing. All right, so examiners, they notice writers who check their work. you know they check for polish, they check for deliberate writing, and they check for all these things, because at the end of the day, um it reflects whether or not your work is confident, whether it's professional, or whether it's precise. Okay, so yeah, that's your takeaway. You need to always have quick a quick editing checklist in your mind. You need to answer all the parts of your question. You need to make sure that you support your ideas. You need to check your tone. You need to keep your grammar consistent, and you need to polish the sentences. These 5 steps can lift your score significantly, even if you're pressed for time. Okay, and then lastly, we want to just basically put everything to work. Okay, so you need to show the you need to go back home, you need to work on a paragraph. Okay, so like I've put a sample paragraph here, and I'm going to read it out loud, and then I just want you to refine it, to correct it, to tighten it, and repeat it to yourself, just so that you're doing the right thing. Okay, and I have it here on the screen. So it says, many people today think that technology is a big problem in our society, and it is affecting everybody in many different ways. Some people believe it is good because it makes life easy, but others are saying it is not good, since people are depending too much on it. This issue is important because it is changing our behavior, and also it brings many challenges that are not governments are not really prepared for. So the situation might become more worse in the future if nothing is done about it. Now, I mean, just by reading it out loud, you know that there's so many things, wrong with this paragraph. So your assignment is to go back to look at the paragraph and make all the necessary corrections so that when we come back in our next class, we can then talk about what was wrong and how we can fix it, or how it should have been fixed, or how you fixed it. Okay? So thank you very much for joining me in this class today. I hope that you learned a thing or two. It was a pleasure being here. Thank you very much. If you have any questions, let me know. If not, thank you so much. I will stop sharing my screen now. Is anybody there?